That was elementary school student Diana Correa of Huntsville, Alabama yesterday. Republicans nationwide playing to an anti-immigration base. Diana is not the only child in Alabama facing a life-changing move. After a judge last week allowed implementation of a new Republican law forcing schools to check every new student's citizenship, even though federal law prohibits denying education based on immigrant status. Fear of the new law in Austinville, Alabama led 7 Hispanic families to take their children out of school. 32 students withdrew in Decatur. According to the Mobile, Alabama Press Register, many of the 223 Hispanic students at Foley Elementary came to school crying and afraid. 19 of them withdrew. Another 39 were absent. My guest is an advocate for restrictive immigration laws who views the Alabama statute as, quote, one of the 5 great immigration reduction acts. Roy Beck is president and founder of NumbersUSA.com. He joins me from Columbia, Missouri. Roy, how are you doing this morning? Thanks for joining us on Up.
Good morning.
Let me ask you the broadest possible question before we get to this law. Is it your position that the United States should deport every one of the 8 million undocumented immigrants who currently live in the country?
Yeah. No. In fact, I'm not aware of a single member of Congress who advocates that. One of the big problems about polling on immigration is they generally give them a choice between legalization, mass legalization, and mass deportation. And basically almost nobody out there that suggests that.
When you look at the clip we played and you hear these reports of school children, and I wonder what goes through your head. At a certain level, this is kind of precisely what the law is intended to do, which is to create this sort of fear that incentivizes people to move out, right?
Well, I don't think that the Alabama legislature was trying to instill fear in the kids. I think they were trying to get reporting so they could have some idea about what the cost of illegal immigration is in Alabama. But the big problem in these states is they only have so many tools. They're the ones that are stuck with the costs. They're the ones that they've got the unemployment problems. And it's only the federal government that can really take care of this. And I got to say that right out front, there's a bill that's gone through the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Lamar Smith's Legal Workforce Act. It passed Judiciary Committee a week and a half ago. That's the bill, if it goes through Congress this year, that will really make most of these kinds of state laws not important. They don't need to happen. But states have gotten kind of desperate, and so you see all kinds of efforts and tools being passed in those states.
Let's talk about that desperation. You talked about sort of unemployment. I mean, right now we've seen there's been studies that show no real palpable correlation between the two, between the level of inflow of immigrants and unemployment. Texas, for instance, the Texas miracle that Rick Perry is running around on, has high levels of immigration, high levels of inflow, and has had a very robust job growth. And there's an argument that those two things go hand in hand. So there is the most sort of cynical, I want to tell you the most cynical or sort of troubling interpretation from where I sit and where people of my politics sit, is that this really is driven by a kind of fear of the other, of a kind of very racialized animus of new people coming into a place. And I've read interviews and I've done interviews myself as a reporter of people saying, I don't want these people, I don't want to press 1 for English, I don't want these people in my school, I don't want them getting, quote, special benefits. Is that what is driving these kind of laws?
Well, I'm sure that there are cultural reasons, but the economic reasons are real, and you cite some studies, but there's plenty of studies to show otherwise. The fact is immigrants tend to go where the jobs are. So it's not surprising that in Texas, where they was creating jobs, that's where immigrants have really flooded in there. But what we know is we've got 22 million Americans who want a full-time job and can't find one. About 19 million of those don't have a college degree. They're looking for jobs in construction, manufacturing, service, transportation. They're looking for jobs at the same place that 7 million illegal aliens are. And the reason that I believe that it's so clear that if you move these illegal aliens out of their jobs, we're not talking about agriculture, that millions of Americans would move into them, is that this administration, the Obama administration, has really ratcheted up the workplace enforcement. That is, it has gone in, done audits, hundreds of businesses in which they've disrupted their illegal workforce. The illegal workers have to leave that place, and immediately, no matter whether it's janitorial or fast food or meat packing, Americans, both native-born, foreign-born citizens, plus legal permanent resident aliens, line up for those jobs everywhere in this country. So it's hard to believe that immigration is not affecting unemployment when every time you move an illegal alien out of the job, an unemployed American fills it.
It's unclear that that's the case, however, right? I mean, there are massive complaints.
No, it is.
No, it's not. I mean, there are massive complaints of labor shortages by farmers in Alabama right now as we speak. I can read you the reports saying that dynamic that you've identified precisely is not happening.
Chris, I said non-agricultural.
But why does the dynamic not? A job's a job. Why? Explain to me why that dynamic doesn't work in agriculture but works for, say, janitorial services.
The reason is that we have allowed over the last 30 years for field work in agriculture, and it really has been primarily over the last 30 years, to become peasant labor. Now, it was not a good job before, but it's gotten much worse over the last 30 years. So basically, you do not have any kind of paths of recruitment. You don't have families that are used to doing agriculture. And so consequently, agriculture is almost entirely, not entirely, but overwhelmingly a foreign labor, both legal and illegal.
That's what
and so this is a very different kind of thing. So, and the other thing is you have to remember is that these farmers, the only reason they're having trouble is because they decided to use illegal labor instead of an unlimited legal foreign guest worker program. It's available, and they've gotten caught short. This is a problem that will work itself out pretty quickly now that they know that they have to use legal labor.
I want to come back. I want to ask you about the president, but I want to come back to the Alabama law, because I was going through it today, and there are aspects of it, and it's a law you've praised, and I understand that your position is that this is essentially second best option when states are left hanging by a federal government that refuses to solve the problem. But there are provisions in this law, aside from checking student status, I find deeply troubling. One of them is that contracts entered into by people who are here without out of status are not valid. And I have to say, you know, the right of a sovereign person to enter into a consensual contract with someone else seems to me actually like fundamental core to the liberal order. Going back to the Magna Carta, that we have the right to enter in consensual contracts with an other person who has sovereignty over their person. For the state of Alabama to say those contracts are not legitimate strikes me as a deeply, deeply radical position.
Yeah, my organization doesn't take a position on those things. I mean, again, I'm sorry, you're right. We don't believe that, for the most part, the answers are in the states. However, it was interesting in the recent Judiciary Committee meeting in the House, where they were dealing with Lamar Smith's bill on mandatory workplace verification. Most of the Democrats, the liberal Democrats, actually said if the federal government doesn't solve this problem, the states should have the rights to do all of these things. I thought that was, I think it was a little bit disingenuous. I think that we just have to keep coming back to the fact that illegal immigration happens because people in other countries know that they can get jobs here. If they can't get jobs here, most of them won't come. They don't come here for welfare. They don't come to commit crimes. They come to get jobs. And we have allowed, over the last 30 years, millions of foreign workers to come here illegally or to come here legally and overstay their visas. I mean, Romney has it right when he keeps saying, turn off the jobs magnet. That's the main thing. The more they focus on the fence or on, frankly, on in-state tuition, they're off the main subject. Illegal immigration will basically dry up if you dry up the jobs. And this bill, the Legal Workforce Act, which I believe will pass the House this fall, and I think has a chance going to the Senate this fall as well, that will basically dry up nearly all payroll jobs in this country.
Right.
And you will see hundreds of thousands of Americans moving into those jobs, and you will start to see hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens leaving the country.
Roy Beck of NumbersUSA, I'm sorry to cut you off. We are up against a break here, but I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you for saying that immigrants are not coming for welfare, and they are not coming to commit crimes, and they are coming to work. And I think we see common ground on that.
That's
and I hope we can have you back on the show. Thank you so much, Roy of NumbersUSA. Our preview of the Sunday political talk shows is coming up. We were just talking to Roy Beck of NumbersUSA, and I'm now back with my guest at the table, Reihan Salam from TheDaily.com, Rinku Sen from Colorlines.com, Maggie Haberman from The Politico, Bill Cohen from Bloomberg View, contributing editor to Vanity Fair. Rinku, what did you think of that interview?
Well, I think that Mr. Beck is recognizing that there are lots of economic concerns that people have regarding immigration, and there are a set of racial concerns and cultural concerns that they have. And I interpret his interview as trying to separate those two things. I think he's understanding that there is a level of racial attack against immigrants that will just get to be too much for Americans. It'll be too high a price to pay to deal with whatever they think the immigration problem is. So if you're forcing kids out of school, if you are generating a lot of racial fear, if you're preventing people from being able to work with the police and report crimes and so on, that creates problems if immigrants cannot enforce the contracts that they have with employers, for example. You take away all of their rights, you strip them of everything, then it's just un-American. People are not going to tolerate that, and yet they have these economic concerns. So I saw him really trying to move the economic argument forward and start to quash the cultural arguments.
I thought it was so interesting also because obviously we brought him on because, you know, I've interviewed him before and I've written about immigration. NumbersUSA is one of the sort of the oldest sort of restrictionist groups. He didn't seem to really want to associate himself that much with the law and its particulars, and I think partly that's because it's hard to watch a 7-year-old girl cry and say, you know, and Ryan?
Well, I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason is that actually, you know, he's been working on these issues for a very long time, and I think that, you know, a lot of his concerns come from concerns that have been raised by organized labor for a long period of time that have, you know, kind of more recently, you know, shifted away in other directions. But I think that, you know, one of the things that he said is that, look, who benefits? It's people who are very similar to those workers who are being displaced. It's people who are permanent residents, legal permanent residents. It's going to be, he didn't mention this, but ex-offenders and other populations that people are reluctant to employ. I think that that's the issue. The issue with the immigration that we're dealing with now, and a lot of less skilled immigration, legal and illegal, is that what it does is it actually enhances wage dispersion. Affluent people benefit when you can outsource more household production, and people who are competing with those workers have a somewhat more difficult time.
Let me separate two things though here, because this is you and I have gone back and forth on this issue before. The data on wage dispersion is somewhat inconclusive, right? So it's unclear. It looks like there is some negative effect for people that are, say, high school graduates when you look at places that have high levels of undocumented workers. That said, concern for the job prospects of ex-offenders is not what is driving the legislation that is passed by a supermajority of Republicans in Alabama. Let's get real about what the politics of the law are.
This is something that I find so interesting, because I think that for many people, what really matters is what's motivating this.
Right.
And there are other people, and I think Roy Beck is one of them. Roy Beck, who has very idiosyncratic political views.
Sure.
Political views that I don't share. My views on immigration are not the same as Roy Beck's.
Right.
But I think that what motivates him is that, look, he doesn't have people who have exactly his mix of environmentalist and kind of pro-labor, et cetera, concerns on the immigration issue. So he's looking at what is actually going to move the ball forward on what I care about. And I would recommend that conservatives, progressives, and everyone else think a little bit more about that, because I do not know what is in the soul of anyone who's advancing, legislation of one kind or another. And in a way, it kind of doesn't really matter, because politicians will hire them to do a job rather than to emote.
But it does. Let me just say this: it does matter at the end of the day, because there is. I believe strongly in a national soul, and I think that there is something offensive to the national soul. I'm saying this, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but I was reading these stories about these school children in Alabama, and it really upset me. I felt like we had broached some...
How do you feel about big agribusiness companies using those children in order to advance their interests and objectives?
I agree. I think the whole system is totally screwed, and I would not defend the current system of farm labor that we have, but there is some deep... The fact of the matter is that those kids being kicked out of school, right? Those kids leaving their school isn't an accident of the politics of the national mood. And here's my point, is that when you pass a bill like that, you are endorsing a certain kind of vision in politics. I understand that people have come to the immigration perspective from different places. I understand that, and I think you're right. And to be honest, as I've done more reporting about immigration, I have found certain arguments that restrictionists make more persuasive than I did in the beginning. I've actually been convinced on certain things. But the politics of that, what is happening there and what that endorses, the vision of the polity that it produces, I think, is deeply, deeply toxic. That's me getting on my soapbox.
It is toxic, but also, even if you took intention out of the equation and you didn't worry so much about motivation and you looked at impact, we've got the wrong guy. If you are concerned about jobs and job creation and job growth, limiting the rights of undocumented immigrants is not going to, in fact, solve the problem, partly because we have very segregated labor markets in this country. We like a certain kind of person in a certain kind of job, and no matter, and if you get rid of that person who currently has that job, there's a process that you have to go through to fill it with somebody else. And that process is not going to take place immediately and produce jobs for all of the unemployed people. We need a public jobs program to move that forward, and that's where people should be focused rather than on enforcing unenforceable immigration laws.
I think there's a danger in, well, I think that we might be conflating a couple of issues. I think that is a view that, of course, many people hold, and I think that, what I'm advancing is the idea that it's important to, and, Chris and I had a spirited disagreement about this, look to the intention. But another thing I want to say that actually Beck didn't raise is just this anxiety about the costs facing immigration gateway states. So one of the things is that, as he said, immigrants are not coming here to commit crimes. They're not coming here to do they come here to work. But the thing is that actually, when you look at what's going on is that less skilled migrants of today have the same educational attainment level as less skilled migrants of the 1920s. But the native-born population has advanced. So that creates a situation where there's a very large, very significant gap in those skill levels. And that also means that actually the wages tend to be very low. For example, in Texas, you have a large number of minimum wage workers, et cetera. And that actually creates other costs. And when you have a situation where the federal government isn't meeting the costs for these immigration gateway states, that actually creates a lot of pressure on those budgets. And I think that that's one reason why you have a lot of states that are taking these actions, which I, by the way, tend to oppose. I think that a lot of what you raised about the Alabama law actually doesn't make sense, but I think that it's a problem where you have this serious mismatch. Rapid demographic change in these areas, the federal government not paying sufficient attention to the problem, and that causes strains.
I will agree with that, Reihan Salam of The Daily, our pregame show for the Sunday political talk shows after this.